Over the course of this century, our tax system has been modified dozens of times and in hundreds of ways. Yet most of those changes didn't improve the system. They made it more like Washington itself, complicated, unfair, cluttered with gobbledygook and loopholes designed for those with the power and influence to hire high-priced legal and tax advisors. But there's more to it than that. Some years ago, an historian, I believe, said that every time in the past when a government began taxing above a certain level of the people's earnings, trust in government began to erode. He said it would begin with efforts to avoid paying the full tax. This would become outright cheating and eventually a distrust and contempt of government itself until there would be a breakdown in law and order.
Senators, before I finish, I want to address directly the concerns many of you have raised about the mistakes I made in preparing my tax returns. These were careless mistakes. They were avoidable mistakes, but they were unintentional. I should have been more careful.
Take a look. We want to take money and put it back in the pocket of middle-class people.
Anybody making over $250,000 is going to pay more.
You got it. It's time to be patriotic, Kate. Time to jump in. Time to be part of the deal. Time to help get America out of the rut.
Can you believe we elected that guy? I mean, don't you just shake your head every time he talks? Anyway, as we know, the old saying, the power to tax is the power to destroy. And the millions of pages and regulations set forth in the tax code gives Congress the ability to control our behavior. The healthcare law comes through the tax code. Every single impact on our lives is either incentivized or disincentivized through the tax code. From sin taxes to property development to road creation, Congress uses the tax code and tax legislation in order to control us. It's just that simple. They knew it in 1776, and Lord knows we know it today. So what we've talked about today is getting engaged, getting involved. We've learned about the 10th Amendment and the Second Amendment and the 16th Amendment that we're talking about now. And what you need to understand is if we actually do get involved, if we actually do pull this thing off in November and return America to its conservative values, there may be a solution on the horizon for our tax issues. Larry Walters has been a resident of Longwood since 1974, and he is a district director for Florida Fair Tax Educational Association, a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization which actively promotes the replacement of the entire income tax system with a national consumption tax, the fair tax. Their mission is to inform and educate the citizens of Florida on alternatives to the current system of federal taxation based upon the following principles: fairness, simplicity, transparency, pro-economic growth, and revenue neutrality. Here to give us a little talk about the fair tax, where it is, and what could happen if we actually win. Welcome, Larry Walters.
Thank you, Tico. Well, you and I have the most difficult task of the afternoon, to endure the last speaker. And I want to start, I was asked to talk about how the fair tax relates to the Constitution, being today's event is constitutionally based. So to get that started, I think we need to have some definitions as groundwork, as a foundation. And I've gone to two different dictionaries, one called Web World and the other one, the Merriam-Webster Collegiate, for these definitions, because as you and I know, all dictionaries don't read the same. So the first word I want to define is duties. A government tax on imports or exports. And the Merriam-Webster dictionary says a tax, especially a tax on imports, duties. Tariffs. A government tax on imports or exports. Isn't that strange that the definition for duties and tariffs is identical? And Merriam says, a schedule of duties imposed by a government on imported goods of, or in some countries, exported goods. That's synonymous, huh? Duties and tariffs. Imposts. Money collected under a tariff. And Webster says, something imposed or levied, a tax. We got 3 different words to say the same thing, don't we? Excise, a tax that is measured by the amount of business done. And Miriam says, it is an internal tax levied on the, now listen to this, on the manufacturer, the sale, or the consumption of a commodity. And commodity has many definitions. One of them is which? Anything of value. Taxes. Charges against a citizen's person, property, or activity for the support of government. And Miriam didn't even give a definition. They just gave some synonyms. Taxes cause you to stretch. They are extended. They strain. They cause tasks, difficulty, imposition, demand, and burden. I think we can all agree with that. Now, with those definitions in place, I want to turn to a document here called the Constitution of the United States of America. And you've heard it referred to at least twice today. Article 1, Section 8. And I will read directly from it so it's not misquoted. The Congress shall have power to lay and collect taxes, duties, imposts, and excises. Are those 4 words familiar? To pay the debts and provide for the common defense and general welfare of the United States. But all duties, imposts, and excises shall be uniform throughout the United States. Even under the 16th Amendment, the government is not doing what is called for by Article 1, Section 8 and the 16th Amendment, because the income tax is not uniformly applied. Okay, how does the fair tax measure up to this? Very simply speaking, the fair tax is legislation that is in the House and the Senate, and it abolishes the entire income tax code. It abolishes the IRS. It means we never have to file a federal tax return again. It means the almost 50% of people who are no longer paying taxes will start to contribute to this economy. And it means that under the fair tax, with the income tax gone, the last thing that it does is it causes the initiation of the repeal of the 16th Amendment, which gave Congress the right or the privilege to tax incomes in the first place. So the fair tax cleans house. Now, some people argue it's not constitutional. It's got some flaws. I'm not here to tell you that it is perfect, but it does meet the requirements of the Constitution. Some people say, for one reason or another, that it's not good enough. Though to those people, I say, if you are willing to sacrifice something that is very good for something that you perceive as excellent, that means in this case you're willing to settle for the income tax system we have or some abomination that's in the works. And there are several of them. Every income tax proposal that is on the table today is an income tax proposal with the words flat tax. Who cares if it's a flat tax? The fair tax is a flat tax. The fair tax assesses 23 cents out of every dollar at the retail cash register. The fair tax says no corporation or business will have any burden of tax compliance for the federal government. It means that they will have some additional funds available to invest in growth. It means that when they export products, they will be on a level playing field with our foreign competition. How many of you know that we are at a 17 to 18% disadvantage economically when we export products or when we import foreign products? That's right, because the research found that embedded in the price of everything we buy today is 20 to 25% in taxes that are hidden. They are the taxes and the compliance costs that businesses incur. Well, if a business has a legitimate business expense, that means it is part of a cost of doing business. They have to recover that. Otherwise, they will go out of business. So what do? They bury those costs in the price of whatever it is they are offering. And that price gets buried, and it goes on to the second step of the supply chain, the third step, and who knows how many steps there might be in any one particular item, but the costs get embedded and compounded down the line. And we pay for it at the cash register. Those costs go away under the fair tax, and those costs are replaced by the 23 cents out of the dollar. Some people argue 23 cents won't fund the government. The research says differently. The research says that the fair tax is revenue neutral. In actuality, it provides a little over $300 billion more than the federal government gets today. And the fair tax, in order to be totally clean and transparent, does not exempt anything from being taxed, which means our essentials, our necessities, are going to be taxed also. How do we overcome that? I'm glad you asked. The fair tax has what's called a family consumption allowance. You may have heard it referred to as a prebate, a rebate of a tax that will be issued in advance. Well, who's going to manage that? How about the Social Security Administration? They already have the system in place to take care of millions of payments a month. This is just a little bit of more work that they'll have to do. So they'll need a few people and more computing power. And it's a done deal. And those of you in here, I am sure, will all qualify for the prebate because I believe each of you have a legitimate residency in this country and you have a legitimate Social Security account. If you don't have those two elements, you don't qualify for the prebate. And what that means is that visitors to the country don't get the discount or the prebate. Illegal aliens don't get the prebate. And many of them will self-deport because all of a sudden their cost of living is going to go up considerably here. It won't be so economical for them to live here as they are. So the fair tax does some very, very wonderful things. It's a very simple concept. And some people will tell you, I've heard this, I'm sure if you've talked about it, you've heard this. It's a great idea, but it will never happen. What? It already happened. Folks, back in 1776, and all the way till 1945, we were the fastest growing economy in the world. We became the envy of the world, and they loved us. Those who weren't our enemy, those who were not our friends, hated us, they feared us. But it wasn't until 1945, 1950, after World War II, that people realized they could start voting themselves pay increases. If they voted for the right person, that person would take money out of your pocket and give it to you. That's what we have today. The fair tax eliminates a lot of that. Ladies and gentlemen, it's a war that we are at. It's not going to happen overnight, and it's not going to happen by itself. Our power is the power of our vote. And we have to unify the vote and get behind candidates who advocate strongly the passage of H.R. 25 S13, the Fair Tax Act. Representative Sandy Adams is a co-sponsor of the legislation. And she should be commended for that. First day in office as a freshman, she co-sponsored that bill. So, you have endured the toughest part of the evening. Now, I'd like to leave you with a comment that's off script. Looking around, you might be a little bit discouraged. The place isn't full. We got a small number of people here. Don't be discouraged by the numbers that are here. You heard him talk about it. We are the vanguard. We are the patriots. We smell the smoke. We know there's fire. It's up to you. Don't go home and go back to Survivor and Dancing with the Stars and all of that other junk. Do something productive with your time because our nation is at our mercy.
Thanks, Larry.